Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to another episode. This time on the podcast, we have Muskaan. Welcome to the podcast. So,
Hello.
so there's this thing we do on the show where we ask the guests to introduce themselves because I'm pretty much bad at introductions. So, who is Muskaan Chandra? What does she do?
Okay, so hi guys. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me. This is the first podcast I've ever been a guest at, so very cool.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so about me, I am currently in my fifth year of electrical engineering at IIT Bombay. I live in Mumbai. I will be joining strategy and as an associate in the next 5 6 months. Ab- about stuff I really like probability. I
Mm-hmm.
really like math. I find the whole deep tech startup ecosystem very exciting. I joined Campus Fund as an investment associate this August, and it's been a really cool journey of talking to just exceptional founders, learning a lot about how startups grow, how startups fail, a lot of just exciting stuff in the Indian startup ecosystem. Apart from that, I really like to read. I also play the guitar, and I think that's about it.
Interesting. So you just mentioned about you liking probability, right? So whenever so I like math as well. So when people say they like math or concepts related to those, I always ask them if they have read the Taleb's Inserto. Like, are you?
Oh, I haven't. Yeah.
So you should. It's great. So Taleb in general, he's a mathematician. I think he's from Lebanon, and he writes non-fiction in a very mathematical sense. I think you should
Okay.
try giving it a read. It's like a huge series, like it's like a 4 part, but you should try that. Okay. Apart from that, let's talk about IIT Bombay first, because as you guys mentioned that. So a lot of people want to get into IIT Bombay. So what's the scene like? How is the startup culture there? Like how do people usually, how does the setting look like in IIT Bombay?
Okay. So we were talking about this before, where I
Yeah.
said that IT Bombay does not have a great startup culture, and I think it's more that people
Mhm.
tend to follow traditional paths, right? So IIT itself is a traditional path where if you want to do engineering, you're like, so first of all, okay, you start with, okay, I am an Indian student. The most likely option for me is engineering, and then it's an IIT, and then once you're in IIT, it's a lot about getting good grades and getting a good job, because you there is a possibility of getting good jobs which pay you enough to support yourself and support your family, and a lot of people come in with that thinking. So there is a lot of like traditionalism over there. I
Mm-hmm.
think startups are a very exciting concept for people when they're in like first year and second year, but it's not something that people think of doing immediately. It's more of a long term goal where people are like, okay, I'm going to work for 3 4 years either in software engineering or in consulting, and I'm going to figure out where I can actually start up, and then they go and start up like a few years down the line. So in terms of the student entrepreneurship culture, it's not great at the moment. There are
Mm-hmm.
efforts to increase it. So I know that there are talks of certain policies where they're going to encourage student entrepreneurship, and then there's obviously e-cell and the whole e-summit thing happens. But I think it's a lot of founders from elsewhere coming to IIT and
Mm-hmm.
pitching rather than founders from IIT itself.
Very interesting. Talk me through your exchange program.
Okay, so this was an exchange program in China that I attended last summer. It was hosted by
Mm-hmm.
Tsinghua University. So Tsinghua University is one of it's sort of like the IIT of China, but a lot more selective, a lot more
Mm-hmm.
prestigious. All of that is there. I think for me, the process of like getting till there was
Mm-hmm.
more hard and more exciting than the experience over there. So for me, I was the only girl selected. There were a few other people
Mm-hmm.
going, all guys. My parents were very concerned about me going to China because, first of all, the Great Firewall is there, so you're completely blocked from
Mm-hmm.
all sort of communication with any other country. Then there were concerns of COVID and me going somewhere internationally where safety could be a concern and all of that. And I also received the selection letter very close to the actual flight date. So I knew that if I have to go, I have to get a visa in like 4 days. Otherwise,
Yeah.
everything is just gonna go waste. So
Mm-hmm.
there was a lot of like planning, a lot of me convincing my parents that this is the right thing for
Mm-hmm.
me. It's gonna be like a great opportunity. I'm gonna meet so many people. I'll figure out language. I'll download like translation apps and stuff. Things are
Yeah.
gonna work out. So a lot of that. Finally, the visa somehow came on time. We went. It was like just a completely different experience because
Mm-hmm.
over there we went and figured out things are extremely different in China. They have completely different like app ecosystem, completely different language, of course, completely different way of thinking, and I got a chance to meet a student from to meet students from a
Mm-hmm.
lot of different countries, which was very cool. I figured that so students in Asia, which is like countries outside of India, actually
Mm-hmm.
do travel within Asia a lot. So for them, it was
Mm-hmm.
very common to like go from Vietnam to China or move from Singapore to China. Whereas for us, it seems like a very far away concept for us to go from
Mm-hmm.
India to China just like on our whim. So that was something that was very new to me. Food was obviously very new. I was
Mm-hmm.
non-vegetarian, so I honestly got to have a lot of fun, tried like stuff that I never
Mm-hmm.
imagined trying in my life. So
Mm-hmm.
very cool experience overall. And in terms of the way they approach technology and the way they approach work, I think a
Mm-hmm.
lot of learning for me there because so Chinese people work extremely hard. They're very
Mm-hmm.
smart. They have a lot of cool stuff going on in the entire AI ecosystem, and just in terms of the way they go about their work. So work culture is similar in the sense that you have like a 9 to 9 job where you go to office
Mm-hmm.
in the morning, come back at night, but they have this thing where they give you a lot of time for lunch and for an afternoon
Mm-hmm.
naps. Even as students, our last class would be at like 11:15, and the next would be at
Mm-hmm.
2:30. We were expected to have lunch, go back, take a nap, and come back to work or come back to
Interesting.
study. And that's a culture that they follow across their companies, across like PhD students, master students. And that was something I found very interesting because it makes a lot of sense. Like it's proven that afternoon naps are beneficial to
Mm-hmm.
productivity, and that's not something that we really account for in India. But over there, they're very particular about that, which is something I
Mm-hmm.
found very cool.
Interesting. So, couple of questions from there, right? So, the first question is sort of unrelated, but how accepting are the Chinese people of Indians? Like, how does that work? How are the dynamics there?
So interesting question actually. I was told by several people before going that racism is going to be there. They are not going to be super happy that you're there, but and it's possibly true because I was, to be fair, in a very sheltered environment. I was there
Mm-hmm.
in Shenzhen in the university. We went around to travel, of course, as tourists, but
Mm-hmm.
we were primarily inside the university, and people were very nice to us, very welcoming. To a certain extent, I think they had to be because we were exchange students. They wanted to
Mm-hmm.
make sure that we have a good opinion of the
Mm-hmm.
university, which we did end up having. But I think overall, people were extremely nice. Even while we were traveling, we talked to a lot of tourists with the help of like only translation apps because we did not
Mm-hmm.
know the language. And a lot of them don't speak English, but they were very accepting of that. They were willing to like accommodate this entire weird conversation where it's solely through the phone
Mm-hmm.
and typing out stuff, but they did help us out in a lot of places with just simple things like booking a metro pass or like buying something off the street. So
Mm-hmm.
very nice people in that regard. And I think in general they also sort of have this opinion where because we are more comfortable with English, right? And for the Chinese, that's not something that's prioritized for them. They did have this
Mm-hmm.
opinion where they think that it's easier for Indians to just do better globally because it's a sort of
Hmm.
advantage that was there. So they were very respectful overall.
Very interesting. So, how is the education system like different from India? Considering, at least from what I can gauge, like we are pretty similar in general, like Chinese and Indians. At
Mhm.
least the way they approach work, because it's 99, like they're very dedicated and whatnot, hardworking.
I
How
agree.
different is the education system apart from like the naps, like the curriculum wise? How is it different?
Okay. I didn't get a chance to look at the specifics, of course. I can only
Mm-hmm.
comment on a more cultural perspective where I think it is similar. It is more competitive. And I
Mm-hmm.
think the other thing is that in India, we have a very, STEM focused mindset where like,
Mm-hmm.
you have to do engineering or you have to be a doctor. Over there, it's not like that. So they have two top universities, which is Tsinghua University, which I went to, and then they have Peking University. And over
Hmm.
there, Peking is essentially their business and art school, and that is also extremely highly ranked. So,
Hmm.
Peking and Tsinghua are essentially like rivals, which is something that you won't see in India. Over there, that is not the mindset. They value both equally. They are rivals. Their leaders, which are the political leaders and the people that finally go to the top ranks in the government, are from both universities. The person that founded the Chinese Communist Party is, I think, from Peking
Mm-hmm.
University. So, a lot of mutual respect in that sense.
Mm-hmm.
But from a workaholism perspective, I think it's pretty similar, probably even more over there. I talked to the students that study in Peking, study in Tsinghua. They said that essentially very hectic. A
Mm-hmm.
lot of time goes into studying, so a lot of like time management. And I think from their masters and PhD students, they definitely expect a lot more. So
Mm-hmm.
over there, to get a PhD, you do have to publish at least 5 to 6 papers before you actually get the degree. Whereas over
Mm-hmm.
here, that's I
It's like
mean, we're
one,
not.
right? Yeah.
Yeah, it's if at all, so not even close.
Have you worked on research papers before?
Yeah, so I'm a dual degree student, so I
Mm-hmm.
do have to write a dual degree thesis, but there is no expectation of it like compulsorily resulting in a published paper. So
Mm-hmm.
that in that sense, it's very different in China, where they have a lot of emphasis on research output, and their students are like practically in the lab day and night, and that's just an expectation they have, and they work really hard.
Interesting. So let's say if some Indian student wants to go and study in China, and let's say they're selected as well. So what are certain things they have to keep in mind before going there?
Okay, so there'll be things on two fronts. One will be the academic front, and the other will be just the cultural and living situation front.
Mm-hmm.
So, from an academic front, one is that it's going to be hard because you don't know the language. So,
Mm-hmm.
definitely try to learn Mandarin as far as possible before going itself, and also while you're there. It just makes life a lot easier, even for like your day to day, but also from the academic front. The second is it's going to be very demanding, obviously, because the academic environment is more competitive there than here. Plus there are students that know the language, plus the expectations are really high, like I said,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of like the amount of research papers you publish. So all of those considerations are there. From a living situation perspective, vegetarians will have a hard time, and there's
Mm-hmm.
no two ways around that. Like you either have to cook yourself every day with minimal groceries, or you try to
Mm-hmm.
figure out how you can find food outside. So all of that is there. I think apart from food, things are great in terms of
Mm-hmm.
like even social life. People are welcoming. They go and party a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Similar culture to what's there here, and then in terms of the living standards, they're definitely higher. So at least in the big cities
Hmm.
like Shenzhen, Shanghai, and Beijing, living standards are far better than they are in India. And so there was a student I met that came first to IIT Bombay
Mm-hmm.
for a student exchange, and then
Mm-hmm.
he came with us to China. He was originally from Taiwan, so he
Oh,
told
got it.
in Bombay itself
Mm-hmm.
that when we go to China, you'll figure out what the living standards should be like, because
Mm-hmm.
there they're not so great. So
Very interesting.
in that sense, yeah, life can be easier or harder there, but it sort of depends. And I think being foreign students, life is harder in the sense that you need a certain amount of like for like getting the work visa,
Hmm.
those sort of considerations. And foreign students are not really given citizenship. They're not given a lot of things. So moving to China can be a great temporary move in terms of learning, but if you're planning to live there permanently, there are these
Mm-hmm.
considerations where
Got it.
you won't get the same benefits as a domestic student.
Interesting. So how expensive is it in general? Like considering if you rank it like UK, USA, and like how does that work? How expensive is it?
I think definitely lesser. So UK, of
Hmm.
course, UK and US both are extremely expensive. I would
Mm-hmm.
say slightly more expensive than India, but you see a
Hmm.
lot of people from countries like Pakistan, Bangladesh migrating to China to study there. So
Hmm.
when I was there, I met a lot of like students from Pakistan, one from Kazakhstan, Bangladesh. I think because the opportunities are definitely much better, and pay like the fees is probably similar. So
Hmm.
Xinhua in specific is actually looking to expand. So the reason for holding the exchange program was so that we find out more about what the university is like and potentially make a decision to move there. So they have two campuses, one in Beijing, one in Shenzhen, and they really want to grow their Shenzhen one. They want to get in like a lot of grad students,
Mm-hmm.
masters, PhD both. So they're very open to like funding students completely.
Hmm.
So from an accommodation, food standpoint, things are not going to be expensive, but ultimately you will be a student. So
Yeah.
it's not like working for like a big corporate. But yeah, I think definitely a financially better choice than US and UK. And considering that visa issues are a thing even in US, I think yeah, people can take a call accordingly.
Yeah. So talk me through electrical engineering, right? Because considering the work you're doing right now, it's not like really related to electrical. And we
Yeah.
have had like similar guests. So we have had people from, so Nipun Gupta is from Venture Highway, and
Okay.
he studied pulp engineering or something of that sort, which deals with papers. And then now he's a VC at Venture Highway. And like, so how is the situation with you? Like, do you enjoy electrical engineering, and how is that?
Okay. It's been a roller coaster, to be honest. So initially I
Mm-hmm.
hated it. And in the middle, I was sort of
Mm-hmm.
like okay with it. Now I like it. I think so. At least in my college, the way the program is structured is in the initial 2 years, you are going to basically do everything that is part of electrical engineering. So you'll be
Mm-hmm.
doing analog, digital, power engineering, and like a bunch of stuff. And then from third year onwards, you get to choose what you want to focus on. And that was a sort of turning point for me where I was like, okay, instead of doing circuits and stuff, I
Mm-hmm.
can just do probability, and that is something that is allowed and encouraged over here. So
Mm-hmm.
it allowed me to like shift from just the sort of circuits and digital logic and that sort of stuff to more probability and ML oriented stuff. So, in general, what I'm specializing in right now is communication and signal processing. And signal processing in general involves a lot of machine learning, like image processing, speech processing, stuff like that. And
Mm-hmm.
it also involves probability in the sense of what I'm doing. So, what I'm doing is essentially working on reinforcement learning. So that
Mm-hmm.
the very fundamentals of that is just probability, where you figure out, okay, if there's an event, this event can either take the value 0 or 1. What is the probability of it happening? So that is the fundamental from which it begins. And then it goes on to more complex stuff where you can finally write like navigation
Mm-hmm.
algorithms for self-driving cars, or the AlphaGo program, which essentially is an AI based chess player. So things
Mm-hmm.
like that can be built probability, which I found very cool, and which I like the fact that okay, this is something that's part of electrical engineering. So I don't necessarily have to switch to CS or something, even if I really want to do it. So that was something I liked. And academic load wise, it was very overwhelming for me in the beginning. And
Mm-hmm.
later, as and when I got to choose my own courses, at least it got interesting, if not less hectic. So
Mm-hmm.
it's been like sort of an uphill journey.
Interesting. So, considering you're from the electrical background, right? What do you think about the semiconductor industry in general? Because this is something I'm asking every VC or someone who is like sort of related to tech field. So, what do you think
Yeah.
about that?
I think it's gone through its ups and downs, right? So there,
Mm-hmm.
especially during COVID, there was the whole
Yeah.
semiconductor shortage and all of that. But I think that a lot of the reason why AI is booming so much is because of hardware and because of
Mm-hmm.
semiconductors. Because and a lot of my professors tell me as well, like also because they are from electrical, they want to sell their own field, of course. But
Yeah.
I think in general, it's more that AI algorithms have existed since years and years, right? So that
Mm-hmm.
was never a constraint where people did not know how to do things. It's just that they did not have the computation power to do things at all. And ever
Mm-hmm.
since like GPUs came into play and hardware industry overall has been growing, semiconductors have been growing, that has really changed the whole landscape of how we approach AI, how we, like how Gen AI has become so big. A lot of it is to do with hardware, which is why I think that it's very important to prioritize this probably over how much we think of AI algorithm and stuff, because finally it all comes down to computation power. If you don't
Mm-hmm.
have that, you can't really do a lot even with AI. So there's that. I think in terms of how India is doing, I honestly don't know the specifics. I know that they're trying,
Mm-hmm.
but
Yeah.
Taiwan has always been the semiconductor hub.
Mm-hmm.
That is where things really progress at a fast pace. That's where innovation really happens. And
Mm-hmm.
I think India, like to some extent, has the potential to reach that. I don't think we're there yet.
I think the only company which deals in things similar, I think, is Sankhya Labs. I think they're in
Mhm.
Bangalore at the moment. I think the CEO is Parag Naik, and like I
Okay.
think that's the only company which is doing something. They're in 5G as well. They're in chips as well. So
Yeah.
that's that. So did the LK99 superconductor news shock you last year?
Oh, I'm not sure about it.
So there was this weird paper leak, which said that some scientists from South Korea had figured out superconductors at room temperature. That's what the entire leak was about, and people are going crazy on Twitter. Like, are you on Twitter or no?
No.
Why is that?
I found it hard to like access the right communities. So I was on
Okay.
Twitter and I followed a lot of accounts, and none of them seemed very interesting. And I know that there are better spaces that exist which would excite me more. Just like there are better accounts that
Mm-hmm.
exist, there are better, yeah, just communities that exist. For some reason, I think I did not spend enough time
Mm-hmm.
finding the right places. So I was sort of stuck in this place where I'm seeing boring content or just not seeing stuff that excites me. So I eventually ended up leaving.
So I've been telling this to every VC I'm speaking. Okay, the first thing is to watch Black Mirror if you haven't already, because that's
Yeah,
something you have watched it.
I
Wonderful.
have, I have.
So the other thing I'm saying is just hop on Twitter, because like the last two episodes I've had, they were not on Twitter, and then I showed them the feel, like how interesting it can get. Like you'll see startup demos like every other day. Like that's what it is. You'll find like new founders. It's like a great. I think at least from my perspective, it's like a good discovery tool.
Yeah,
And as I said, I'm building RaceGate, right? It's more
yeah.
of a discovery platform for VCs.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's some form of a, if not a you can call it like a subset of Twitter, like a slice of Twitter with just the startup ecosystem. So I
Mm-hmm.
think Twitter is something you should kind of explore, like try following the Build Space ecosystem or the
Okay.
F.INC ecosystem, and then you'll sort of get in like great startups in your feed. Otherwise, I know it's very boring, because I think last when I was in 10th and 11th, I think 10th, I was into like politics a lot because I was a dumb 10-year-old, right? So I mean,
Yeah.
everything seemed very easy for me back then. Okay, this is politics, this is simple. So I just used to follow political tweets here and there, and my feed
Mm-hmm.
was horrible. But when I switched to like more of like useful stuff, then I figured like the power of Twitter, it's great. At least for now, after the Musk's takeover, I think it has become better
Yeah.
in general, at least for the tech ecosystem on Twitter. What do you think about Musk, like in general? Like, what do you think about him? Because people have
Uh,
mixed opinions.
yeah, I don't like him too much just
Interesting.
from like an
Mm-hmm.
ethical perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, he completely changed Twitter, and I know that. So I'm not on Twitter, so I don't have strong opinions on that. But
Mm-hmm.
people do think that he's completely ruined it, and then of course, like
Mm-hmm.
value is gone down. All of that has been happening. In general, so I have a very like socialist view of things where
Mm-hmm.
it's like, okay, Musk is like a complete capitalist. He has so
Mm-hmm.
much. He can do a lot more in terms of just like wealth distribution or paying his employees
Mm-hmm.
better or just in general being a better person, which he doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
He has a lot of very controversial views.
Mm-hmm.
But I think he's founded startups that are doing really
Mm-hmm.
well. So yeah, it is what it is.
Interesting. Okay. About campus fund, right? Like, how is it different from other VCs? How does that work?
Okay. So one, of course, the fundamental thing is that there's a student focus there. The
Mm-hmm.
second thing is that the way we approach our interactions with founders, right? So, like I said initially, we were talking of this podcast that because it's a very student-run thing, because I'm a student and I'm talking to student founders, the entire interaction is going to be very respectful. It's going to be from a space of the founder knows more than I ever will because they're working in that industry, they've built a product in that industry. So I need to give them the space and time to explain things the way they want to. And I need to trust that they have done their own research, they know what they're building and why they're building. And because the students, they haven't had a lot of experience with like pitching, building slides, all of that,
Mm-hmm.
I need to like give them time to essentially walk me through their product the way they wanted to. And it's a lot of that. So uh, the first thing is the way we approach student interactions, and the second is also, I think, in the sort of like the way we interact with our portfolio companies as well. So it's a very interactive space where like there's a WhatsApp group with founders, and then there are monthly meets, and of course like the founding team of Campus Fund also gets a lot of information from their own portfolio companies. They check in on how they're doing, but in general the interactions are very positive. So that is just from a cultural standpoint, and from a more like financial and the way we run. Campus Fund runs a lot like a startup because we are
Mm-hmm.
essentially a VC that was started in 2019, right? So
Mm-hmm.
uh, plus we're a VC that focuses only on students. So it's something that's very new to India and also new to Asia. So Campus Fund was Asia's first student-run, student-focused VC, and currently we're India's largest. So
Mm-hmm.
it's something that we don't. So like we don't have other VCs to like get inspired from in that sense, because we're the only ones that started investing in students. So it's something very new. It's something that the people that back Campus Fund, like HDFC Bank and a lot of founders, they believe in the vision, and we also collectively believe in the vision. And it's also different in the way that it fundamentally runs, in the sense that Campus Fund has cohorts every year, right? So, for
Hmm.
example, I'm part of the 2023 cohort. So it's not like a VC where you have like a fixed team and a fixed number of people to
Hmm.
work with. So you don't like get to know every single person that you're working with in a span of two, three
Mm-hmm.
months. So with me, it's like I've worked with multiple different people on the team in a span of
Mm-hmm.
6 months, and it's been very short engagement. So it's been like working with them for like 1 week or 2 weeks, evaluating
Hmm.
the startup with them, and then moving on. So it's been very dynamic. I've gotten to learn a lot of different people, a lot of different styles of working. So for me, it's been very exciting that it's not like a full time job where I have to go and
Mm-hmm.
then work like 9 to 9. It's been very dynamic. It's been very new for me.
What qualifies like a good pitch to you, for you?
Okay, so in general, the way we go about it is there are three fundamental things. One is the market, the second is the
Mm-hmm.
solution, and the third is the founder. So these are the three things we gauge in general when we're evaluating a startup. So because we're a VC, we like markets that are big. We like markets that have a lot of opportunity. When it comes to the solution, the only thing we want is for it to have a good moat, and
Hmm.
a good moat in the sense that it should be defensible. It should be clear to us why this particular startup can capture a large amount of market, and if the
Mm-hmm.
market is big enough to have, say, like multiple players, this startup is going to be one of those players. So can it give us a 10x exit? And the third is the founder. So in founders, we typically look for passion and a good understanding of what they're doing, which I think it's easy to see as well. So a lot of founders, like I said, right, they don't have a
Mm-hmm.
lot of experience pitching, but they do have, they're more than capable of talking about what they're doing in a very passionate way, in a very
Mm-hmm.
convincing way, and that's something we really enjoy seeing on students in
Mm-hmm.
general. And I think the final thing is just how founders approach their interactions with their founding team and their overall
Hmm.
team. Because we want to see if they have a good dynamic, if they like the people that they're working with, and if they think that, the dynamic is good enough for them to build a
Mm-hmm.
sustainable team going forward.
Interesting. So, I had this idea, right? So, which was to make at least the startup ecosystem or the VC ecosystem a little bit more accessible to other people. So,
Yeah.
there are certain terms which people get scared of, right? So as you use the word moat, not a lot of people. I
Okay.
mean, it might sound like off to you, but not a lot of people know what moat is, or not a lot of people know what churn is, or like TAM is, right? So, are there certain, let's say, what are the five basic terms that everybody should know if they're at least like quote unquote associated or looking at the startup slash VC ecosystem? Let's start with mode, and the other ones you can sort of add in.
Okay, sure. So do you want me to explain the terms or list the terms?
Like a little bit of a like a lucid explanation would be good.
Sure, sure, sure. All right. So moat is the first one. So moat is essentially, so the word is derived from like a fort. So when you look at a
Hmm.
fort, you'll see that it's built in such a way that it's not easy for other people to come and attack the fort, right? So that
Hmm.
is like the fort has a specific moat, and when we use it in the context of startups, what we mean is that the startup should have a certain thing within themselves that allows them to defend themselves and their own market share from different companies. So, for example, if I'm building like a SaaS company for a specific solution, I
Hmm.
want to build a startup that has a strong moat, and if I do that, it will not allow other startups to come and take away market share from me. Not just startups, but other companies, whether it's big players, medium sized players, new players. I need to capture a certain amount of market share that I'm going to be able to defend, which is why we also use it
Hmm.
interchangeably with defensibility. So that's more.
Interesting.
practically moat can be a lot of things. It can
Mm-hmm.
be the sort of network and contacts you've built over the years, or it can be a patent that you filed. It can be the way you approach your business model. It can be
Mm-hmm.
say like 10 years of experience in a certain sector. It can be the amount of like knowledge you have in a certain field. So deep tech startups normally, the moat is easier to identify, because if somebody is doing a PhD, we can automatically see that they
Hmm.
have a lot more specialized experience in a certain field. Or if somebody's filed a patent, then they automatically have that sort of IP protection. So there are different forms of moat. It can be anything, but it should just be something that is defending your startup from being eaten up by like another company.
Interesting. Interesting. This is gonna be a real and flip of sorts. So as that. Other than that, okay, let's talk about churn then. What is churn and how what's the easier way to look at it?
All right. So by churn, do you mean in the sense of people leaving teams?
Yeah.
Got it. Yeah. So churn is essentially that, how fast does an employee leave you, or how fast does somebody on your team leave you, and so that is employee churn. And then there is customer churn, where
Mm-hmm.
you have customers that are using your product, but they start leaving their, so let's say you build an app, right?
Mm-hmm.
And your ideal situation is that if you've spent a certain amount on marketing the product, you gain a certain
Mm-hmm.
number of customers. You
Yes.
ideally want them to continue with you for a certain amount of time, but you see them just leaving after say a month or after say a
Hmm.
week. That is what you call churn. Churn is essentially just leaving. So, in an ideal scenario, you want your customers to be sticky, which means that they stick with you
Mm-hmm.
for a while rather than churning. So, it's a term that's used very often when you build apps, especially consumer apps, because you want customers that are visiting your app often enough. And let's say if you see that their rate of visiting the app has gone down, you can assume that they have probably left and they will not be coming back anymore, which is that customer has that's customer churn.
Interesting. So I think the next term we can get at is TAM. What is TAM? How should the normal person approach it?
Okay, interesting. So TAM stands for total addressable market, which is essentially the complete size of opportunity that you have in a certain space. So
Mm-hmm.
the reason we look for TAM as VCs, or we discuss TAM as VCs, is that we want to know that you're building something in a space which is large enough, so you have the potential to grow. And if there are finally going to be multiple players or just a single player in the market, you have the potential to reach there. So a big TAM means you either get to capture a really large market for yourself, and if not, it means that you're going to go capture a sizable market. So even if
Hmm.
you have like say 5% market share or 10% market share, the total market is big enough for you to actually be very profitable and to get a lot of revenue. So when it comes to approaching TAM, there are
Mm-hmm.
actually multiple ways of figuring out what your total addressable market is. So
Hmm.
there's like a bottom up approach, there's a top down approach, but your final estimation should just be, if I'm building a certain product, what is the total number of people that can potentially use the product at some point of time. It doesn't need to be within your geography. It doesn't need to be people that you can serve at the moment or even in the near future of say like 1 or 2 years. It just needs to be, this is the total potential this product holds, and if I was say the best player in this ecosystem with the best resources, this is the total market that I would be able to serve.
Interesting. What are certain unbackable fields that VCs usually do not touch, and why is that so?
Okay, interesting. So a lot of consumer startups which are not tech heavy. So for
Hmm.
example, if it comes to like like loungewear, sportswear,
Hmm.
or say merchandise manufacturing, stuff like that. So that is one whole segment that is very cool to be in. It's very exciting. It's very Gen Z, but it simply it has a lesser of a possibility of scaling that big. So
Mm-hmm.
that is one area. Another is so anything that services, anything that is not very tech based, because as soon as you're building something that is
Mm-hmm.
service heavy, that means that to grow, you're going to have to hire more people,
Yeah. It's
and
very linear in that sense.
so that automatically means that you won't be able to scale as
Mm-hmm.
fast as you can as when it comes to like
Mm-hmm.
a tech based product. So these are two spaces. I think from my side personally, I have
Mm-hmm.
passed on a few startups that were doing really well in the sustainability space.
Mm-hmm.
The reason for that is just that so if you're in sustainability space, the view is that your customers are going to be people that are mandated to buy stuff from you, right? So, for example,
Mm-hmm.
if you're building, say, an air quality solution or like some sort of monitoring solution that
Hmm.
helps you with sustainability reporting, that's not
Mm-hmm.
going to be something that customers, which is your companies, are excited about. It's going to be something that companies have to sort of get installed or have to sort of adopt in their systems, which means that there is a certain amount of growth that is limited there. So that then there are industries where the government has a very heavy role. So, for example, defense, or even when it comes to sustainability, there are very specific startups that the government wants to finance. So it becomes hard for other startups to sort of grow in that area.
Interesting. So, what do you think about communities for VC? Like, do VCs look at communities or community-based startups? Is that something they're looking at?
Can you elaborate? What do you mean by community based?
So, let's say like someone is building like a community for designers or like a community for coders. Like, is that something they look at? Because like at the end of the day, they have some form of distribution, right? So, is that something which VCs are attracted to? Because they have numbers, but like they don't have a direct way of making money. So, what do you think about communities and like VCs backing them?
Okay, interesting. So I haven't come across such startups myself until now. So
Mm-hmm.
I haven't like been part of those discussions where we're sitting and evaluating a community-based startup. I think there's like scope for growth for sure. I think that
Mm-hmm.
if it's executed well enough, it can be really exciting. It can be scaled very well.
Hmm.
So I also think that it's not a very like traditional idea. It's a more nascent thing, and I do think that there's a lot of potential, especially because when people talk about networking and like sort of buying into a network or buying into a community, I think that that whole idea in general has a lot of traction at this point. So I do think that there's a lot of scope.
Interesting. So let's go back to the terms question, the terms section, right? What do you think are some other terms which people should know?
Okay, interesting. Hmm. I think GTM for sure. That's
Sure.
just go to market. So go to
Hmm.
market is essentially how you're planning to take your product to the market to your customers,
Mm-hmm.
right? So a lot of people come up with like GTM strategies and they say that this is how we're going to go about it. So it's essentially sounds very fancy. It isn't that fancy, and it is also
Mm-hmm.
not a very important part of the pitch, I would say. So, for example, if you come across a really good startup as a VC, you won't really pass on them just because they don't have a good GTM, because that's something that can always be changed if the fundamental solution is good, right? So GTM essentially means that, okay, so your product is developed, you know
Mm-hmm.
exactly what to do with it, you know how customers are going to use it. You have to decide how to market it to people, how to onboard customers, and that is essentially going to be you taking the product to market. So people
Hmm.
have a lot of strategies. They go about researching on what the best way to take this to market is. For example, should they like go to colleges and get campus ambassadors and promote their product,
Mm-hmm.
or should they partner with certain organizations, partner with institutions, or do like a direct B2B sales strategy where they talk to company representatives and sell their product.
Mm-hmm.
So there are multiple types of strategies, and overall, it's just called go to market.
Interesting. Let's get to CAC then. That'll be the last term, and then we'll switch to other questions.
All right. So CAC is essentially customer acquisition cost. So
Mm-hmm.
it's basically the amount that you're going to pay to onboard certain number of customers. And in an ideal scenario, if your product is really great,
Hmm.
your CAC is going, or the way you market it, your CAC should be low,
Hmm.
because it means that for say an X number of customers, you're spending a lesser amount to get that customer to your app, or your app or your product. So a lot of it is going to be essentially marketing costs, sales costs, where you're spending on a certain ad campaign, or you're spending on reaching out to certain people to have conversations with them to get them interested in your product. And startups generally end up burning a lot of money and a lot of funding that they get because they have high CAC. So a
Hmm.
great product should aim for a low CAC, so that they spend money on growing themselves in terms of like investing in R&D or investing in like product development, as opposed to investing on onboarding customers. But it's also something that's sort of inevitable, where
Hmm.
to have a great product, you do have to like spend on marketing, you do have to
Mm-hmm.
spend on onboarding a certain number of customers first before like say network effects come into play or some of that happens. So it's inevitable, but the lower it is, the better.
Okay. Speaking about CAC, what do you think about credit strategy and how they are looking at things? How does someone manage academics whilst, let's say, focusing on other skills or getting internships? How does that work? How do you think a student should allocate time? Considering an engineering student, because you're one, so how should they allocate time in order to do other things as well?
So I don't think I have very specific advice. I'll talk more about what I've seen myself doing and what I've seen others doing. And so from my experience, so as soon as I joined college, right? So especially when you're a fresher, there's a lot of stuff to do. Every club is trying to come and get you to join. There are a lot of like tech
Hmm.
meets, a lot of stuff just going on campus in general. And a lot of I heard this one specific senior say this thing where he was like, हो जाता है manage and you just need to
Oh.
do what you want to do, which is something that I have tried to apply myself and I've seen a lot of others applying. So I think when it comes to deciding the stuff you want to take up along with academics, right, the first thing to decide is just how intense do you want your next few months to be. So first you answer that, and based on that you figure out what are things that you really want to take up, what are the things that you're interested in taking up but you're okay with letting go of, and then what are things that you're completely not interested in. And then based on how intense of a semester or how intense of a few months you're okay with dealing with, you select things accordingly. And based on that you make a decision on how much stuff you can deal with like realistically. So I do think that a lot of times people underestimate themselves and of course overestimate also, but I think underestimate is more common, which
Hmm.
is what I've seen in a few people where they like say if I'm not doing well in academics already, I should
Hmm.
not take up more things, or perhaps I should not take up more things from the get-go. First I'll figure out academics and then I'll see what else I
Hmm.
want, which I think is not the best approach to go with because time honestly flies by, right? You have like
Hmm.
4 years in an engineering institute. Even apart from that, let's say you're doing like a 3 year graduation, time is limited and a
Hmm.
lot of opportunities build up on top of each other. So let's say you're involved in like a certain activity or a certain club in your first year or second year, chances are you're going to get much better than that in the following years. You're going to take up better
Hmm.
roles, you're going to do more impactful stuff. So opportunities build on, which is why I don't think waiting is a good option. I think you should just take up the stuff that you really want to do, and once that's done then you figure out how to deal with like a certain week at a time and then a certain day at a time. So I
Hmm.
personally am not a very um, organized person when it comes to like taking lists or writing down things. I've seen a lot of
Hmm.
people do that as well. That doesn't really work for me. I like to keep things more flexible and spontaneous.
Hmm.
And then I know that okay, if I have like four things to do at a time, I'll do at least one which I feel like doing right now, and or otherwise, if I know that there's a deadline, there's a clear decision to make. Right, you have to do the thing that's coming up the earliest. So I think a lot of times people are sort of afraid of taking up multiple things at the same time because there's a certain amount of decision fatigue where if you have
Hmm.
to do like say two things and both of them have a deadline the same night, you sort of get confused about okay which one should I focus on, and then you end up procrastinating and doing nothing at all. So
Hmm.
instead of that, it's better to just take up the stuff you want and then just get used to the whole process of prioritizing based on importance and urgency and then doing things accordingly.
Interesting. What are certain non-negotiables that every engineering student should contribute in or like participate in when it comes to college? Like some things that you should always do if you're a part of a college.
Okay. I honestly think nothing in terms of what you do, but definitely in terms of like who you meet. Because
Hmm.
I think in general, people obviously talk a lot about networking and all of that. And I do think that, even aside from like a purely immediate professional value, it's more of that everywhere you go, the greatest value you get or your greatest asset is just the relationships you build, right? And
Hmm.
it's not just in terms of like speaking to particular people who are doing very well or speaking to certain very successful people, but just that the people you hang out with really influence the type of work you do and how you think. So and it is important to invest in spending time with people, spending time with your peers, because that's how you learn, that's how you get ideas of what you can be doing in future. Your friends will play a big role in motivating you. So I would say that you should select friends accordingly and also invest in building those relationships with them. Talk to people that you really want to talk to people that you want to learn from. And by doing that, you will sort of figure out your own non-negotiables and stuff in terms of like the activities you want to do. So
Mm-hmm.
I think nothing specific in terms of like you should do coding or you should do a certain amount of organization, nothing specific in terms of that. Just more
Mm-hmm.
that be open to conversations and be open to getting to know people, because that is where you will eventually end up getting the most value from.
Interesting. So, from like a VC lens, what
Mhm.
do you think about AI and how it's changing the world? I know it sounds like a very cliche question, but
That's
trust me,
fine.
everybody has like a very different answer to it. Like some people are like,
Yeah.
oh, kuch nahi ho raha hai, but some people are like, okay, things are going haywire. So, what do you think about it from a VC lens?
Okay. So I agree with both lenses. I
Mm-hmm.
think that look, AI is definitely changing stuff. There's no two ways about it. A lot of like Gen AI has changed a lot of stuff already. Everybody's talking about it, right from like startups to consulting
Mm-hmm.
firms, to everywhere, right? And a lot of like solutions are also very AI based. But I do think
Mm-hmm.
that it's definitely overhyped. And apart from
Mm-hmm.
being overhyped, there's also just a slight lack of understanding of what AI can actually achieve, because a lot of times the way we study AI is very limited, right? So even like you're
Hmm.
doing computer science, I was doing electrical, so I studied AI, but that you study it only to a certain limit, and then beyond that your perception of it is based on what the media publishes, what you see other companies doing and stuff like that, right? So there isn't always a complete understanding of how much you can actually achieve with AI and how accurate it can really be. And a lot of times startups bring in AI or use the term AI to get funding, which is
Mm-hmm.
fine. But it's also just that it's not necessary. So since I talk to founders, I know that a lot of founders come and they have really great products, and then they try to
Mm-hmm.
bring in AI into it, and they say that okay, so we're going to be implementing this ML model, and it's honestly like we can also tell that it's not strictly necessary. They have a product
Mm-hmm.
without it, but I also like get the whole perspective where there's a
Mm-hmm.
perception of having to use AI. So it's just that you have to sort of find the right level where you don't feel like you have to introduce AI and everything, but you use it as much as you require. So that is the whole
Mm-hmm.
like using AI perspective, and then there is the whole whether AI is changing things, how to actually build a good AI startup, right? So I think with that, the most important thing is that so AI is a great tool to have, right? The only
Mm-hmm.
problem is that because AI is a great tool to have and because it's so accessible, everybody is going to
Mm-hmm.
want to use it. And because of that, the moat you can have with it is very hard to find,
Yeah.
which happens with I think every great technology, specifically with AI, because that's the current thing.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, for example, a lot of people talk about like ChatGPT and productivity and how it's going to change things.
Mm-hmm.
The only difference is that it's going to change things uniformly for everybody. So you can have a mode to like a certain extent where okay, you're slightly better at using a certain AI tool than somebody else, but finally, everyone is sort of coming to a similar level. So when it comes to startups specifically, a lot of Gen AI startups are coming about, right? Where
Yeah.
say Gen AI startups in legal tech or in health tech, where they're giving like health advice, or they're sort of helping out lawyers with their clerical work. So a lot of stuff is happening in that space, but a lot of the startups there don't seem to have very clear modes, which is also very understandable, because if everybody is using open source models and everyone is using like the same sort of wrappers,
Mm-hmm.
or even if not wrappers, even if they're building their in-house tools, it's very hard to differentiate yourself from another startup that can do the same thing.
Hmm.
So it's harder to find moat, and what you have to do for that is essentially make sure that you have some sort of advantage, either in terms of the data you're using or in terms of the architecture you're using, if it has a patent, or otherwise in terms of like specific software or how you train the model. So the way you find your moat is going to get more specialized, and just like having an AI model itself is not going to be enough.
Interesting. So let's talk about Perplexity and the way things are going with them. I do not think they have their own proprietary model yet. That's what my assumption is, and I think they're using a couple of them in order to source data and then publish it. So, and there is like $1 zillion, like I think last week. What do you think about that? Considering they don't have a proprietary piece of technology or proprietary model, does funding them make logical sense to you or no?
Got it. So I won't comment on the specifics, but I think that it does make sense only because proprietary technology is not the only way you can differentiate yourself. So like I said, there is the whole data aspect to it, and there is the whole like the way you train your models, how efficiently and how fast you can train. So there are a multiple set of potential modes that you can have, and if it's like a startup that has a huge network, right? It is very possible that they're going to have access to exclusive data sets, whether they're small, large, doesn't matter. But they are going to have access to certain exclusive things that other people won't be able to get access to, and that itself will become their mode. So, sure, everyone can use the same models they're using. Everyone can like try to attempt to build the same thing that they are, but because their fundamental thing, which is the data they're using, is better, or the way they're training is better, they will automatically be better.
Interesting. So, what do you think about Midjourney then? Because these guys have not raised any money, from what I remember, and now they don't want to raise any money because they'll get into legal trouble because of their overfitting problem. So, what do you think
Yeah.
about Midjourney and the problems they're facing?
No specific opinions.
No, okay. So, do you know about the overfitting problem they're facing?
No, I don't know the specifics.
Oh, it's very funny, right? So like if you go to Dali and if you just say, okay, whatever, soda bottle, they'll give you a soda bottle, and if you have like a normal, like let's say, okay, okay, like that. If you ask Midjourney to say, show me a soda bottle red, with brown fluid in it, it'll give you the exact image of Coca-Cola, which is something which it's not supposed to do. If you type in show me a Thanos scene, it'll give you an exact scene from the movie. Like it's replicating something which it shouldn't be doing, and that's what they are about to get into legal trouble. I think it's a problem with V6 specifically. With V5, I don't think it's anything. It's way too simple. It's overfitting in that sense, and that's why they're not raising any money, because if they raise any money, ultimately they'll
Interesting.
end up
Okay.
going in trouble. So that's what the problem with Midjourney is. Okay,
Yeah.
so now this question might sound off, but like now building tools or building any tech products has become easier because of AI. And believe me or not, anyone who has a little bit of experience can build an MVP in like 2 weeks. That's what I've at least seen. At least with myself, I can build anything in like 2 weeks, at least the basic functionality of it. How does
Yeah.
that change the market? Because there's so many startups now. How does one differentiate? How do you make a moat for yourself?
Hmm. Yeah, so it's very similar to like the problem with AI, where because it's accessible, it's easier to build, but it's harder to get a mode. So I think that is just in general a problem that comes with technology, right? Where you expect productivity and you expect things to get a lot easier, but there is a certain level of like there is a certain level where it sort of saturates. And I think you had mentioned this as well, where as an entrepreneur, how do you do well in a saturated market? Which I think is the scenario right now, and I think that's not necessarily a bad thing, because when it's saturated, you're very clear of what the limitations are, what exists, and where there's a potential to change things or innovate. Right. So you're completely right in the sense that it's much easier to build products. It's easier to build MVPs, specifically when it comes to AI products as well, because there are open source models. It's not as inaccessible anymore, which I think just on a fundamental like socialist level is a very great thing, because everyone should have the chance to like experiment with these things and build their own thing. It should not be concentrated
Yes.
with only like the Googles and the Metas of the world. But I think the difference is ultimately it still exists because data itself is inaccessible. So that's something that's very specific with AI. But when you think of software products in general, the analog to that is just that you don't have the same amount of computation power and you don't have the same amount of resources. So even though things seem more accessible, I don't think to a complete extent they are, simply because larger organizations always have more resources and they always have things that you don't have. So you can have like a better GPU, they'll have better hardware, they'll be able to build much faster. So as a startup, you will have things on a more cultural, flexibility level where you don't have to go through like layers
Hmm.
of bureaucracy. You don't have to go through the same amount of permissions. You don't have as many constraints. But from a resources front, I think that startups are still constrained when it comes to like comparing them with larger organizations.
Do you think monopolies actually exist in the tech field?
Yeah, definitely. Like when it comes to data, for sure. I know that I'm repeating
Mm-hmm.
it, but it's just that it does happen where, and like it's like you can have like the best algorithm, you can be the smartest
Mm-hmm.
person, you can change architecture as much as you want, but you simply don't have that much computation power available as a student or even as a regular person in the tech industry. So even like a Google employee, right? They will not be able to make as much of a change as if they decide on an organizational level that we want to do X, Y, Z. So that is on the tech front. Even when it comes to like companies like say Zomato, Swiggy, monopolies exist
Mm-hmm.
there. When it comes to Amazon, so Amazon has had a lot of antitrust cases against them, and that whole
Mm-hmm.
scenario is going on, which I think is just sort of inevitable. Like it has happened. That was the way their business model was built, where they knew that they want to capture a lot of market share and they will let go of profitability for that. And now that they've done it, there are antitrust cases against them, and I don't think anything's really going to come out of them. I think Amazon is going to
Mm-hmm.
be in its place, but I think monopolies definitely exist, and they will continue to, because it's hard for governments also to like completely split up companies, and it's against the government's
Hmm.
interest if those companies like
Sure.
end up helping them out.
Very interesting. Do you read VC reports?
I read some of them, but yeah, not like very frequently.
Have you read the Indus Valley report, the recent one?
No, no.
So it's from Amal Vats wrote it. So he's also a dual degree from IIT, and he worked at strategy and as well before joining Bloom. Now he's at
Okay.
Flash. So he wrote the report about like in general the way people transact in India. I mean, he sort of segregated the Indian markets. There was India 1, there was India 1 Alpha, and then there was India 2, India 3. So India 1 Alpha are like people like us who consume Netflix, Spotify, and stuff like that, who are okay with spending a lot of money online. Whereas India 1 is like the middle class who do not really spend a lot of money online, but they still are capable of sort of putting in money in let's say the markets or whatnot. And then there is India too, who are let's say the users of let's say share chat or like meme chat or maybe other products of that sort. So he clearly defined as to how people spend money and why it's difficult to build for India, because the only people spending money is the India 1 Alpha. Like anyone else will not be okay with putting let's say $25 a month, because that's
Yeah.
not something that's feasible for them. So according to you, how difficult is it to build in for India, like to build for an Indian space? And do you think there's a cap to it, like itna hi growth kar sakte if you're building for India? Is that something that you think? What do you think about it?
That's very interesting. Uh, I do agree with what you said, definitely, because the thing with India always is that because it's so diverse, it's hard to build, right? That's why
Hmm.
even like foreign companies find it hard to build offices here, and that's why they have to like go through JVs and all of that, because like apart from income, there is also the whole regional diversity. There's a difference in the way people approach things, the way like the languages they speak, all of that is it. So I do think that it's not easy to build for India for sure,
Mm-hmm.
because of course there's always going to be income differences. There's going to be differences in the sort of market that you're catering to, and people do have the opinion that India has a huge population. A lot of them are young. A lot of them are open to spending. There's going to be premiumization happening, so it's going to get easier, which I think
Mm-hmm.
is true. Wherein right now so like smartphone penetration is going to increase, the number of people that are coming into India, one like you described, is going to increase. So there are certain market segments that are going to grow, but I do think that it it's quite possible to reach a
Hmm.
saturation, like wherein if you're building a certain product, you either have different strategies for different target segments, or you
Mm-hmm.
just have to be okay with targeting only one and then focusing solely on them.
Interesting. So as you said about Amazon and the problems they were facing, this Misho. So and the problems they are facing. What do you think about that? Because Misho, they tried to build for India one. Like they didn't. They wanted like people from let's say like towns to sort of build their own shops and do stuff,
Yeah.
whereas they're facing a lot of backlash because of there's a lot of delivery problems, there's a lot of logistics problems. So do you think it's an India specific problem, for like let's say an India one marketplace, because people are not really, I mean, I don't know how to phrase this, but uh, there's a lack of honesty in general, at least
Yeah.
if you're building like marketplaces, like people just do not send the products, they send the wrong product. So what do you think about that? Do you think the Misho problem is unsolvable?
Okay, interesting. Uh, I don't think so because
Mm-hmm.
like there have been companies that have built for sort of the masses, right? Like for example, Flipkart came and they have a
Hmm.
higher market share than Amazon, and that's something that they did very consciously, where they were like, we want to target this particular segment. So, although Misho had been trying for these unbranded products where they want to sell to the masses, but they claim to be pivoting, right? So they want to now
Hmm.
bring in branded products and they want to like pivot their own strategy. So I'm not sure of whether like they believe that it's an unsolvable problem. I think that given the right resources and given the right organizational planning, it is possible to execute. But I do think it's a very hard problem just because of like the diversity reasons, where even if you have like even if you have like the best strategy of how to go about
Mm-hmm.
say different products, how to carry out certain things, it's just that you're going to need multiple skilled people across multiple geographies, right? You can't really rely on like one person to deal with both say Haryana and Kerala at the same time, because it's just not
Mm-hmm.
going to happen.
Interesting.
So
What are certain Indian startups that fascinate you?
okay, so there are a couple that we recently invested in. So one of them
Mm-hmm.
is Green Grahi, which is like
Mm-hmm.
a completely new concept for me. So they are essentially building um, insect-based nutrition for plants and animals.
Hmm.
So what they're saying is that it's very like the current feed that's available, right, for plants and animals. It's not super sustainable. There are a lot of price shocks that happen. It's not a very stable market, and they're building something that's completely new. They're gonna take in insects and then that goes through a lot of processing, and then they come up with some very unique products, and
Hmm.
they believe that that's a really sustainable solution. And I think that so for me specifically, it was exciting because the space was completely new to me. I knew nothing about
Mm-hmm.
it before hearing about Green Grahe, before all of the research that was done. So something very fascinating. Even Igantra, which is the startup that we invested in a few years ago, I think the way they've grown is like extremely cool to me,
Mm-hmm.
especially because they started out as just two students in LPU. They were doing like a project. The
Mm-hmm.
project got some recognition. Now they're like this big space tech startup that's got funded by us, by Sequoia. It's just that
Hmm.
yeah, they've gone really huge, and the way they've grown is just very fascinating to me, because it's like as a student, a lot of students do research, a lot of them work on cool stuff, but they never really see it reaching that commercial level where
Hmm.
just at such a young age, you're like 20, 21, you've done a research project, you never really envision it going that big and generating so much interest from the industry. And that's something that the founders did at Decantra, and that's something I find really cool.
Interesting.
Even
So. Mm-hmm.
so there's the third one, which is Park Smart. So Park Smart is something that I actually came across when I was researching to apply to campus fund, because it was
Hmm.
one of my portfolio companies. That's how I went into it. And I found it very interesting because my mom is very into startups, and she had been
Mm-hmm.
telling me for years that parking is something that it has so much potential. Parking is so messed up in Mumbai specifically.
Hmm.
So many issues when it comes to like going out anywhere, which is why people just prefer to take cabs, take ride hailing services. So that
Mm-hmm.
is something that definitely should be solved for. And then I came across ParkSmart, and they're like digitizing parking spaces and using. So they're doing it both for parking operators and for consumers, which is again something I found very cool. And I just think that they're contributing to the entire smart city vision, right? Where if
Hmm.
India wants to become Mumbai specifically wants to become a smart city eventually, this is something that they will have to do. It's something that's inevitable. So to see a startup contribute to that very actively, that's something I found very cool.
What do you think is stopping Mumbai from becoming a smart city?
Uh, housing
Yeah,
infrastructure
I
was
think
like,
there's a lot of dichotomy that exists. Like, if, like
yeah,
whatever, if you go to Bandra, this Bandra East, Bandra West, and those two are like very different places. Like that
yeah,
exists in almost every part of Mumbai. I think that's what something. I think a little bit of like a uniformity or like some form of a normalization, or
yeah.
some. I mean, not really like China, but like some standard which might probably solve it. What do you think about it?
Yeah, I agree. It's very hard because so there is like the Mumbai we see and then the Mumbai we don't see, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
Mumbai is heavily populated, and you'll see certain areas, like you said, like Bandra or say like BKC, which is very
Mm-hmm.
commercialized, has a lot of like big buildings, a lot of corporate crowd going there. There's all of that, but then there are so many parts of Mumbai which are just not exactly like on the map when it comes to development. So just
Mm-hmm.
like and so there is that, then there is like poor urban planning in general, where like politicians make decisions according to what they feel they have to do, but they're not always
Mm-hmm.
the best decisions when it comes to like just a city planning front, where you have good roads, you have community spaces for people to be in, you have like just like basic amenities for people to live a decent life. That itself is not there. Real estate prices keep on going
Mm-hmm.
up, so just in general like extremely cramped up place. So like people have this whole vision of Mumbai, like just like Mumbai being a great place to get jobs, city of dreams, all of that. A lot of migration happened, and then Mumbai just
Mm-hmm.
hasn't been able to really deal with that in a sustainable way, and it's something that they're going to have to figure out, right? Because
Hmm.
uh, eventually it's like a problem that has to be solved, and if it's not, then consequences will be very strange.
Interesting. What do you think makes Bangalore the startup capital of India? Or do you think it's the startup capital of India?
I do.
Yes. What do you think
Uh,
contributes to that?
I think for starters, just the presence of a lot of tech companies that built their headquarters there. So
Mm-hmm.
every major company you think of was headquartered in Bangalore, right? Like whether it's like Google or it's Bosch or it's like Texas Instruments. So these companies will have offices in Mumbai, they'll have offices in Gurgaon, but the HQ itself is in Bangalore, and I think that
Mm-hmm.
those are the people that began to start up, so to speak,
Mm-hmm.
right? So for example, if in Google there's a lot of culture of starting up, people will first move to Bangalore, work there, then eventually start up, and that's how like a lot of startups began to congregate over there. And I think at this point it's more of like network effects, where you know that
Mm-hmm.
if you want to meet really good founders or if you want to meet good VCs, that is where everyone is going to be based. So you have to be there. So it's like sort of
Yeah.
how Mumbai is for entertainment and Bollywood,
Mm-hmm.
Bangalore is like that for tech and for startups. And to be part of the network, you just sort of have to be based there. And I don't think so obviously there are great startups being built out of Mumbai, out of Gurgaon, out of even like tier 2, tier 3 cities. So all of that is definitely happening, but I think it's more of like the network that attracts people there at this point.
Because I went to Bangalore recently and then I went to one cafe that's called Paper and Pie. I'm not sure if you've heard of it, but and
Uh,
that's where I recorded the podcast with Tamal Butts. And before that, we were just chilling there, and then I found like three founders out like
yeah,
randomly.
exactly.
And one of them had listened to the podcast earlier, and two of them were like Web3 folks. And then I found the founder of the Manipal Hospital. I was
Ah,
like confused. I'm like, what? Why are you here? And then turns out he spends a lot of time in Latin America, and then he wanted to build something there, like because they've started to get a lot. I think I forgot the name of the place, which is embarrassing, but like it's a place in Latin America, and they recently found a lot of minerals, which gave a lot of disposable income to the folks, and then
okay.
they don't know what to do with the money, and then
Mhm.
the guy's like, okay, let's build something which like somewhat in the financial education space for the people there. You know what? I'll look at the name of the place because it's sad. Wait, I'll open the charts and I'll just
Yeah.
that's what. So have you been to Bangalore? Of course, I mean, but
Not
how's your
not
experience there?
recently though. Oh, I haven't been in quite a while. I used to go as a
Mm-hmm.
kid. Haven't been in
Mm-hmm.
quite a while. Just I don't know. Like so, my internships were in Gurgaon
Mm-hmm.
and in Mumbai, so I never really got a chance to go there. But I've heard very conflicting things. I know that living situation wise, it's not that great, right? Considering traffic,
Mm-hmm.
considering that transport is so unreliable there. So all of that is there, but I just think like as a young person, it's great to be in Bangalore. As a
Mm-hmm.
young person that wants to do something interesting, that wants to meet cool people, and like even just in general, if you're starting up, you want to find people for your team, or you want to meet a
Hmm.
co-founder, that's the place to be.
Very interesting. So this question might sound like a little bit odd to you, maybe even off to you, but as you mentioned, you have more of like a socialist outlook towards life in general. So how does it feel to be in a very capitalistic field like we see? Like how do you manage? How does your brain manage that?
Yeah, it's definitely something that I find myself at odds with, because I know, so it's like I said, right? Like, I see really great businesses that can do really well, that can do really good stuff for the country or just even for their consumers, and I know that it's not VC backable, and I know that I have to say no to
Mm-hmm.
them. So it's definitely conflicting, but I think it's just sort of like, you see VC as like, you have to be aware of the limitations of what you're doing. So when I look at startups from a VC point of view, or say when I'm meeting people as an investment associate at Campus Fund, I know that the goal over here is to get a specific exit, and then if it can make a great social contribution at the same time, then that's just a bonus by being part of the VC ecosystem, and this is not one of them. And I know that there are a lot of like impact funds, there's Avishkar Capital, there's Omniar and all of those. But I think to a certain extent, like, they also have to focus on their exits and they have to focus on
Mm.
finances. And although they are focusing on sectors that are much better for India, they're focusing on impact. Finally, it does come down to finances, and that's just the way society is built at the moment, right? That's not something that
Mm-hmm.
I can do much about at this point. And I think when it comes to like the final goal, it's better to fund something good than to not fund something at all. So
Mm.
it just makes sense to be part of the ecosystem than to like not be part of it and try to make change outside of it.
Interesting. I think one of the only massive impact funds I know is I think Rain Matter, if I'm not wrong.
Hmm. Yeah.
I had Dinesh by on the show like I think a year back or something, and then the startups there are like insane. Like they have like a startup called Digital Sunday Grids. Yeah, they're trying to
Okay.
figure out like digital solar. Like it's very interesting, and I think they recently invested in some milk company. I forgot the name. The
Ah.
company invests in. The company backs. Do you know Pragna? Wait, do you know Nihal Sarin by any chance? Like he's a very
No.
famous chess player. That's what I. That's where I saw the logo of the company. Okay, fine. Okay, this is what they're investing in.
Ah. Okay. Okay. Okay.
Yeah, I think the rain matter is the one which sort of intrigues me as well. Okay, so like we are at like the end of the conversation, right? So a couple closing questions. Uh, at the moment, like the VC space seems very glamorous for the undergrad or like someone who's like a first
Mhm.
jobber. So what are certain things like people have to keep in mind before entering the VC space? What are those?
Okay. So I'll say this from the perspective of somebody who does not have a full-time job in VC. Like, I'm part of
Mm-hmm.
Campus Fund, I've evaluated student startups, but I
Mm-hmm.
haven't seen it from a more professional point of view. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't know the specifics of how like a full-time job at a VC would work. But I think things to keep in mind is one, just from like a professional point of view, it's going to be very intense. It's going to involve a lot of speaking to founders, evaluating things quickly, taking decisions fast. You can't really be slow and
Mm.
take like a very long time to like think and come up with a conclusion. You have to think quickly. So there is a certain amount of gut feeling involved, because it's a lot of like investing in the founder as well. So
Mm.
it's a lot of like complex interplay between financial aspects and your market research aspects, as well as the whole social aspect of it. So there are multiple things to keep in, like multiple things that you will be working with if you're part of a VC. So I think that's something to keep in mind, and that's something that
Mm-hmm.
will usually excite people. I think it's always great to like have multiple aspects to work on at the same time. So that's something that personally excites me about VC, or just like working at a VC. So that's point one. I think point two is that, finally, it is going to be about exits. You're going to say no to a lot of startups, and you're going to say no to a lot of great startups. And I think that's something that I find hard and that people find hard in
Mm-hmm.
general, because out of like 100 startups you speak to, you're going to like take things forward with only one, right? Finally,
Mm.
which involves saying no to like 99 other startups, and that's just something that's part of the job. So these
Interesting.
are two things I can gauge from my experiences so far, but I do think that I have a lot to learn, definitely.
Interesting. So, what are certain things student startups or student startup founders should keep in mind before starting up?
Okay, interesting. I think moat is something that they should definitely think about more often,
Mm-hmm.
because like I said, right, there's a lot of like rise of Gen
Mm-hmm.
AI startups, even just generic AI startups, and
Mm-hmm.
even though they're building great stuff, I think that moat is something that they don't always think about in depth, because it like they also know that it's always possible for another startup to come and do better than them, and they're sort of going ahead with their solution anyway. But I think it's something that they can think harder upon. I think the second thing is long term planning. So, from what I can gauge, it's a lot easier for somebody who's an experienced professional to think long term, just because they've seen so many years of professional life, right? So, they know how the
Mm-hmm.
industry changes, they know what can realistically be executed in, like, say, an X number of years. But for students, especially people that are like 21, 22, it's a lot harder for us to gauge that kind of thing, because
Mm-hmm.
we haven't had that sort of experience. We haven't like lived so many years of professional life. So, in terms of planning how their startup is going to go in the long term, what sort of route it's going to take, whether they plan to pivot or not, I think that is something that is harder for students to do. So, it's something that they should work on more. So these are the two main things I think I would say. Finally, I think it's just about finding the right co-founders, if at all, or finding the right team that you want to work with, and then you see yourself working with for at least a certain number of years. Because a lot of startups end up failing just because of co-founder rifts, and I think
Yeah.
that's not something that's talked about very often. But
Mm-hmm.
like in just a practical sense, I think it should be taken into consideration.
Interesting. What are certain sectors that excite you?
Okay, so religion tech and elderly tech for sure. It's also something that as campus
Hmm.
fund we're excited about. So we're
Hmm.
definitely like actively looking for startups in these areas, because market is huge, right? There's a lot of potential,
Hmm.
lot of upcoming startups as well. But in general, a lot of scope for like really great startups to come up and build
Talk me
these
through
days.
religion tech. How does that work?
Okay, so
With examples.
okay, sure. So in religion tech, there are a lot of different spaces, right? So you
Mm-hmm.
can start from like something as basic as e-darshan, or you can talk about
Hmm.
community-based things like you said in the beginning, right? Where you're connected to other people and you have like a whole online devotion system where you can talk to other
Mm-hmm.
people from your faith, as well as talking to like pundits and so on. Then
Mm-hmm.
there's the whole astrology side of it, where it works sort of like you schedule online sessions with them. You have like online fee based astrology consultation. So there's a whole host of stuff happening, and
Hmm.
it's just that because India is that sort of country where religion is important, it is prioritized, people spend a lot of money on it. There's a lot of scope to do a lot of cool things in it, and there's a lot of scope to like scale really big.
What are the numbers? VR space.
Oh, I think very exciting. I don't know if so there are like a lot of very cool VR startups that already exist that are doing really great stuff.
Hmm.
A lot, and it's just that it's a space that can have an impact in a lot of different sectors, right? It's not that it's going to be limited to just like metaverse companies or just
Mm-hmm.
tech companies. It can be used in healthcare. It can be used in education. So I think it's like that sort of space where you can enter a lot of sectors potentially. So there's like a lot of scope just in terms of the diversity of stuff you can cater to. So
Hmm.
there's that, but
Interesting.
I do think that the hardware requirements are very high. Like you have to have a lot of things in place before
Mm-hmm.
like before you can implement a really good product or like make a really good
Hmm.
solution. So I think that entry barrier is high essentially.
Even if the entry barrier is high, I think VR suffers from a horrible retention problem, which is which is weird because VR is very fun. Like I've tried VR multiple times and it's very fun, but I still don't understand how the retention problem is so bad. What do you think went wrong with with Zuck's vision of the metaverse?
Okay, so I'll come to that. I think just before that about VR, it's that there's not a lot of consumer focus at the moment, right? So like people just
Hmm.
think that the devices are clunky, they're not great to use. I just think like it's also slightly a more cultural thing where we're very
Hmm.
used to carrying around gadgets as we do at the moment. We're not used to like wearing headsets and doing that kind of stuff. So until they sort of make it more compact, I think that can sort of be a game changer. It's sort of like when laptops came in instead of desktops, right? Where
Hmm.
the convenience level just changes. So I think that that is something that is not like really prioritized, and we are at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
And okay, that's vision of the metaverse, right? So I think yeah, so metaverse companies are not doing well right now. There's a drop in
Yeah.
funding, all that is happening. So I just think that a lot of stuff was overhyped in the beginning. So
Mm-hmm.
plus, okay, it was around the pandemic, right? So at that point of
Mm.
time, it was very easy to imagine everything happening online and sort of these
Yeah.
online spaces where you can come do meetings. I had gone through like some metaverse startups, which are like metaverse art galleries, and a lot of these like event
Mm.
startups. So a lot of that was happening, but I think I like okay, so from a global interaction perspective, it still makes sense where okay, if I'm in India, I want to interact with somebody who's say based in Europe, then metaverse can be a potentially good option. But I think um just because like ever since the pandemic sort of ended and things shifted to offline, that is one factor that sort of changed things. And I think that
Mm.
it was sort of a bubble where it was not just metaverse, right? It was also NFTs and everything else in the whole crypto ecosystem that was sort of hyped. And then because of all the frauds that have taken place in the cryptocurrency space and NFTs not really taken off, I think all of that has also sort of affected metaverse in general just because they're so closely associated.
Interesting. What do you think about the crypto space in India, considering there are very stringent laws that are in place in terms of even purchasing cryptocurrency? That there's a horrendous capital gains tax. So, do you think crypto is not for India? Like, do you think that's something is true?
Okay. So I think at this point, the stringent regulations honestly make sense
Mm-hmm.
because simply because of the number of frauds that happen,
Yeah.
right? So it's already true that in India frauds are slightly more likely, especially in smaller places. Plus, just awareness and education is lesser in general. So it's it's very easy to get carried away by fancy ads that say you learn XYZ, and if there is no regulation, frauds are going to happen, and they did happen. Like a lot of these scams
Mm-hmm.
happened. People lost a lot of money. Even obviously internationally with the whole Sam Bankman-Fried thing, all of that happened. So I think that for India at the moment, especially when even the number of people investing in stocks are so less, it doesn't
Mm-hmm.
make sense to allow crypto to just like have a free run where they get to do whatever they want. And regulations make sense just from like a consumer protection front. In terms of like crypto not being for India, I just think that like even on a broader level at this point it's mainly just an investment tool, right?
Yeah.
The usage of
Unfortunately.
crypto,
Yeah.
right? Like what they wanted, what the original vision was of crypto being used as a digital currency hasn't really taken off particularly anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Like at least like on a large scale perspective it hasn't really taken off as much as they really hoped. So I don't think it's India's problem. I think it's more of just crypto's problem. That can be just my opinion. But
Mm-hmm.
I just think that in general, because it's unregulated, because it takes up so much more resource than it can give
Mm-hmm.
back, it's not really a sustainable solution for any country as such,
Mm-hmm.
on just like a mass level, not just India.
Yeah, I think the only country which quote unquote adopted it was El Salvador, if I'm not wrong. And
Mhm.
I'm not sure what's up with those guys.
Yeah.
Have you followed that by any chance?
No, no, no. I was following it like a couple of years ago when the crypto
Mm-hmm.
bill was about to be tabled. After that,
Mm-hmm.
I haven't really looked into it. But yeah, I just don't think it's been adopted on a large enough scale,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
also like seems fair.
yeah, makes sense. All right, so we are at the last question of the podcast,
Sure.
which is okay. This is like very generic, but I do this every time to sort of not to piss off the guests, but to just sort of close the recording. So, what are the three pieces of advice that you would like to give to aspiring VCs? This is the
Okay.
most cliche question I could come up with, but this is how I like to end every show of
Uh,
mine.
I mean, I to be fair, I also think I don't think I'm equipped to give advice simply because I don't have a full time job. I've been at campus
Mm-hmm.
fund only for a few months. There's a lot I have to learn. I can just say things based on my experiences, which is similar
Mm-hmm.
to what I said earlier, which is that
Mm-hmm.
when you have to when you're getting into VC, you have to keep in mind of what the end goal is, which is always
Mm-hmm.
to get a big enough exit for your VC fund. So of course you're going to be helping out the startup in on the side, you're going to be like helping a startup grow really big, you're going to be like funding great ideas, but the end goal is always the exit. So you have to like sort of keep your end goal in mind as and when you go about doing everything else that's super exciting, because finally you're part of a fund. Your job is to get a certain or like get a certain multiple, and that's just what you have to do. So I think that's thing one. Second thing is that um, like it's great if you have a certain level of experience in the sector that you're entering in. So let's say you worked at an AI startup, you're going to be much better at evaluating AI startups in future. And a lot of big VCs have this thing where they'll hire consultants or they'll hire people from different VC firms, and all of that happens. But when it comes to like evaluating startups, I think an experience at a startup or some sort of operating experience can give you a lot of perspective. So
Interesting.
I think that a lot of people do want to enter VC straight out of undergrad, but I think that in general getting experience, whether it's in like consulting or it's just broader or it's like a more specific experience, it can give you a better outcome when you finally do join a VC, because you'll be better at evaluating startups quickly. You'll be better at like even just researching industries more faster. So I think that's something that to potentially keep in mind.
Makes sense. Thank you so much, Muskaan. It's been great time. It's been great talking to you.
Thank you so much
Yeah.
for inviting me and for like such an interesting conversation. I think you were a really good conversationalist throughout.
Thank
So
you so
thanks.
much. Okay.